Threadwork has long been one of the primary ways that custom rod builders have chosen to decorate their rods. It's a lot like intricate engraving on a fine shotgun. It's an expression of the skill of the person who built it. It's his love of doing something special. And on the part of the owner, it's his desire to possess the unique. Another part of Threadwork is its pure, open-ended creative challenge. In other words, you can spend years and experiment and develop patterns and techniques, and you'll never reach the point that it ceases to be rewarding, because there really is no finite point at which you've exhausted all the possibilities. So it's a very rewarding way of expressing your creativity. Threadwork was a small part of my first book, Fiberglass Rod Making. It was a bigger part in my second book, Advanced Custom Rod Building. But it was by demand the entire subject for the third book that I did, called Custom Rod Thread Art. So what I'd like to try and do here on the balance of the tape would be to approach Threadwork from two standpoints. One is to give you the basics as far as techniques are concerned, and give you some of the basic patterns, but more importantly perhaps give you a conceptual understanding of what forms patterns and how they're made. And if we get these kind of basics and these concepts together, then you can, if you want, jump into the third book that I wrote, which has, I guess, a little over 100 patterns and about 30 variations, and you'll be ready to pick up pretty quickly on the patterns. Or you can take another route, which is a lot of fun, and that is to do the experimentation and the development yourself. And I'd add one more thing that I've said all along, and that is this is another fun part of rod building. Okay, let's look at the basic diamond wrap. And the diamond wrap, I guess you might say, is the grandfather of them all. It's the basis from which many, many wraps are made. And this is a diamond wrap that I have here in front of me. And as you can see, the diamond, the name diamond, comes from the fact that a diamond pattern in the very center is formed. Actually, to form this, the threads are spiraled up the blank at about a 45-degree angle, and then the thread is spiraled back down the blank at a 45-degree angle. And they're temporarily taped in place, and let me show you what I mean. Here's basically an identical rod and pattern on which you can still see where the threads are taped down. Now, masking tape or whatever, but masking tape seems to be the best, is used to temporarily hold these threads in place, and as you add more threads, you just tape them down. Then when it's finished, these two wraps right here are very important. They're called base wraps. They anchor everything in place. They're wrapped from the inside to the outside, and after they're started, the threads are cut and peeled back, and the wrap is completed, and that's what anchors it. You might be curious about this small space. I've left this that if a person wanted to put a hook keeper in, he could then wrap this in afterwards. As you get more proficient, you can incorporate the hook keeper wrap into this bottom or butt base wrap. Okay, let's look at some more nomenclature or parts involved here. That is, where the threads cross, these are called centers. Okay? And in order to get the threads to cross at a 90-degree angle, the space between the centers has to be equal to the circumference around the rod. If the space were smaller, obviously the pattern would be compressed and we'd have a different shape. If it were larger than the circumference, the pattern would be stretched out, producing still another shape. But to get that nice square pattern, which is important if you go on and get into some of the more intricate wraps, then we're going to need to place the centers one circumference apart. So let me show you how the easiest way is of going about determining those centers. Now I've got here a training rod that'll show up a little better under the camera. And if we want to know what the circumference is at approximately the midpoint of the wrap, and let's say we assumed the wrap was going to be here, take some masking tape, cut off the end nice and square, and now take our tape and attach it to the blank like this, and we're going to make one revolution of the blank to the point where the thread just comes on top of itself. It now touches. I'm going to tear off the tape here, and I want to mark exactly where that thread makes one revolution. I have that mark, that place, and I can mark it here. Okay, I can now, whoops, now peel this off and lay it down on the surface of my workbench. And that space from here to here is the circumference around the blank. Now I can, if I want, measure that with a ruler and use this little ruler to measure off my centers on the blank. Or what I like to use is a set of dividers or a compass. Most of us have these in our homes, or our kids do, or they're certainly not expensive to buy. We want to set the dividers so that it's exactly equal to the circumference. And then when I want to measure off the space, that'll be easy to use. Let me set this out of here for a moment. Now, back to the blank, we need one other important measurement and a mark. And that is, we want to know where the edge of the base wrap is going to be, because that's the point from which we're going to measure our centers. We also have to allow that space. So I would measure off what that would be, and let's say I won't bother to measure, but we'll just say we want that to start at that point. I want to make a template so I can draw a circle around the blank. And a good old masking tape again, just lay a few layers of this tape carefully placed right on top of itself around the blank. Now I can take and I can mark using that as a template, and I'll get a nice perfect circle that'll go around the blank, and at any point on that circle it's going to be the same distance from the edge of the foregrip. In other words, from here to here will remain the same all the way along. All right, we're now ready to do the layout, the rest of the layout on here. And that's when we're going to use our butt wrap alignment tool. I'll set this aside for a moment. Let me introduce this tool to you. It's a very handy tool. It's the fastest and the best way I know to lay out any pattern that you're going to work with. It consists of two parts, the base that's sitting here, and this circle template. Now, you'll notice this is just a plain, standard, ordinary circle template that you could buy any place. And every circle template has, around each of the circles, it'll have a mark on all four corners, you could say, or as we say in rod building, on each of the axes that go around the blank. And that's what we want to locate on the blank. So these are perfectly measured. We can take this and slip it on the blank and mark them, and I'll show you just how in a moment. The balance of this butt wrap alignment tool consists of two boards at a right angle. There's a V-groove cut in here. It runs the whole length, and it's parallel to the back. That's so we can lay the rod in there. And a piece of dimensionally stable material, in this case clear plastic, that is exactly the width from the back to the center of the groove, and it's perfectly parallel. You can make one of these, or you can buy them. You don't have to worry about too much on the details. And that's basically the butt wrap alignment tool, and we'll show you how we can use it. First, let me use the circle template to locate those four axes that we were talking about. I select a hole so that when I put this down on the blank, it fits snug. As you can see, I can set it at any angle I want. Okay? Now, if I had a full rod here, a complete rod, I would have back here a reel seat. And I would want to make sure that this mark that we're talking about here on the circle template would bisect the center of the fixed hood on the reel seat. It would be lined up so that it would be right in line, and I'm talking about one of these marks. Doesn't matter which one, because there are 4 of them equidistant around the circle. And I could sight down there and get it lined up and get it tight, then take my pen or pencil, and incidentally, if you're making any of these marks on a dark blank, instead of using a pen or a pencil, you can use a scriber and just take and very lightly scratch the surface of the finish on the blank. It won't hurt it at all. If you make the scratch lightly, it's going to either be covered up by thread or it'll be filled in by finish. Okay, let's put our marks here. I'm going to put one mark right there, and I'll make these large so that you can see them. And I'm going to mark all 4 axes. We're only really going to need to use 2, but keep in mind you have to do this before you have the guides on the rod, and sometimes at that stage you don't know exactly what kind of wrap you're going to use, whether it's going to be 2 axes or 4. So I have a habit of marking all 4 axes. Okay, so we now have these marked. We can take our circle template off. We're through with it. And we go back to the butt wrap alignment tool, put our rod in, and you remember this mark, that circle was where the edge of the base wrap was. We can look down and we see those marks that we just made for the 4 axes, and we would have the full rod here, so we could select that one which would be on top of the rod as we look down on it from a fisherman's position. In the case of a spinning rod, we'd have the reel seat underneath. Casting rod, we'd have it up on top. Okay, that I know that I want to measure off my centers along this axis. Take my dividers that I had previously set to the circumference, and I simply line that up there and up here. And again, I'll make these marks larger so that you can hopefully see them. Mark off one circumference or center for where the threads will cross. Then mark another. And I would mark off as many of these as I was going to have diamonds, or what we call repeats, of the pattern. Now, on this mark, we got to remember, was the mark for the center, and these were the 4 axes. You recall that actually the first pattern on the opposite side, 180 degrees around the blank, that's going to be halfway between the 2. So if we again go back to these little marks, we turn it, that's 90 degrees, keep turning it, there's 180 degrees. And we want it, we said, to be a half of the circumference. So I can take a ruler and measure and find out what half the circumference is. And now on the 180 degree axis, lay my ruler there and measure it, and it happens to be quite close to that other mark, but I can easily remember that, which is which. Now that'll place the first one, and each pattern will of course be a full circumference apart for the rest of the way, and I repeat and do just what I did on the other side of the blank and mark each of the centers. Now I have the centers marked on the rod or the blank, and what I need to do is to take my thread, tape it fast here, and spiral the thread so that it would start at the 0 degree axis, which is the one on the other side, and then just follow from dot to dot on the other side to this dot on this side, dot on the other side, and so on. Just follow that spiraled up, come back and cross right on the dots, and I will have a perfect layout. And you might say, gee, you're going to a lot of trouble to get everything so perfect. Yes, but with a little practice, you'll get very quick at it. And when you progress on to more intricate wraps, you're going to find this will save all kinds of agony as well as a lot of time. So get in the habit right from the beginning to do a good, accurate layout. All right, let me set this aside and I'll show you a rod where I've actually spiraled those threads, and I have the initial, what we call layout threads, in place. Get rid of some of our clutter here so you can see. And you see on here, these crosses, those are the centers that we would have laid out. Here on one side, and then over here on the other side. This would have been the 0 degree axis, starting right on here, let's say, and this, the 180 degree. Now, if I was going to make a diamond pattern, much like the one we saw in the beginning, the center of the diamond was made of tan threads. It consisted of 5 tan threads. I have one of them in place. That means I need 2 tan threads on each side. And we'll get into the development of the diamond, but let's go through here a few tips on the actual wrapping of those threads. I'm cutting 2 threads that are going to be long enough for me to spiral up and back down the blank. I'm going to get the ends of these threads together here, and then I'm going to take a piece of masking tape. See, we do use a lot of masking tape when we build rods. And I'm going to tape that in position so that I can lay these threads right next to the layout threads. Get this like this. Okay, we've taped those threads fast, and I can use my thumbnail to align them a little bit. And now what I'm going to do is wrap these threads, in this case starting off to the left of the layout thread. I'm going to take them up the blank. But principally I'm doing this because I want to show you some tips and make some suggestions. The first thing is, don't worry about getting these threads exactly and precisely in position. As you'll see later, you do stop periodically and you tighten up the pattern. That is, you push the threads together. The other point I want to make is that you keep your hand, and it's this one up here that's holding the thread, at about a 45-degree angle to the blank, and keep it out a fair distance away from the rod. If you hold it in close, like in here, you're going to have problems. This way it'll fall more naturally into position. So just keep moving that down. I'll move the rod down a little as necessary, and lay these threads right in place. Next important point, and that is thread tension. How much tension should you put on this thread? Answer, as little as possible. And I'm saying it this way because I'm trying to emphasize a point. Too often people put too much tension on the thread. Now, let me interrupt here and say at this point we've got to change directions, which means we've got to change hands. I now have my left hand holding the thread, and I've gone around up here the tape a few times, and I'm going to bring this back down. Sometimes you have to jimmy it back and forth a bit. And I'm going to again wrap to the left, put my hand out a fair distance, and lay these threads on. Now, back to that tension factor. Too often people wrap under much too much tension. And what it does is it makes it difficult to move threads later. You say, well, why do I want to move threads? Well, you'll find out that often you've got to, and we'll show an example of a case where you've got to move some threads around. And if they're wrapped under a lot of tension, you have a problem. Also, where these threads are crossing over, the first band went up this way and the second band's coming back this way, we're getting interlocks. And the fewer interlocks we have, the better. So whenever I can, I want to wrap with a band of threads, band being more than one, in this case 2. As I would go on and make this wrap, I would go, I think the next color was dark brown, and I'd use 4 threads and wrap those at one time. Whenever you can, I repeat, you use a band of threads. There are going to be some patterns, however, where the pattern will only form if 1 thread is wrapped at a time. But when possible, use the band. It'll make things easier for you later on. When I get to the bottom, take a piece of tape, tape this fast. My thread's too short to continue to the other side, so I'd cut it off, and I would now take thread and start wrapping up the other side. We're looking at a close-up, a real tight close-up, of the black rod blank with 1 light-colored thread that has been spiraled up the blank and then back down the blank to form a cross. It formed over one of our centers. And we'd have a whole line of these centers, but we want to look just at one of them, get in very close, and see how a diamond wrap develops, the pattern, how it develops. And we're going to really go over the wrapping sequence. And keep that term in mind because we'll use it more later on. All right, we will start by spiraling up a band of 2 more threads to the left side of the existing cross. Those 2 threads will spiral up, and then when we come back down the blank, we will again stay to the left, and they fall into place. Now with a diamond wrap, we always go from one side to the other side. So we have to go to the right side of the center thread, take 2 more threads, the light ones, and spiral them up, and spiral them back down the blank. And we now have completed what we call a pass. We have gone all around the center thread. We would change colors, in this case to dark brown, and we wrap a band of 4 threads up to the left, spiral them back down the blank, the 4 threads again to the left. Now we switch over to the right-hand side of the center, take 4 more dark threads and spiral them up the blank, and then 4 dark threads and back down the remaining side, which is to the right. And now you can see why they call it a diamond wrap, because the configuration is a diamond. Let's add another color that'll be a little brighter. Let's take rust, 4 threads, and we go up to the left, spiral back down to the left, take 4 more threads, tape them down, start up the blank to the right, and back down, again to the right, and our diamond has now been repeated, a little larger as the pattern has grown, and in another color. Now I could stop at this point, but as a finished wrap, it's going to look better graphically, since it's a fairly dark color on a dark blank, if I put a couple more threads, light ones, around the outside. Just going to go around exactly as we did before, all 4 sides, up and down, and the last 2 come into place, and there we have a nicely outlined diamond pattern. Let's look now at what some people term a variation of the diamond wrap called the chevron wrap. Whether it's a separate wrap or a variation, I'll let you be the judge. What is the same is that the layout is the same. We use the same light-colored cross formed by spiraling 1 light-colored thread up and back down the blank. But instead of alternating sides around that center thread, we're going to wrap always on one side, in this case to the right. I'd like to have 2 threads for my beginning. Since I have one in forming the cross, I'll spiral a thread, a light one, up the blank, and another one back down the blank. All right, now I'm ready to go to another color. Let's take rust, take a band of threads and spiral those up the blank to the right, and spiral the same band back down the blank, keeping to the right. All right, let's switch colors again, go to a broader band of brown, spiraled up the blank, and now brought back down the blank, always to the right. You can see the chevron forming. We'll use a light accent that'll really bring it out. 2 light-colored threads spiraled up the blank and back down. And you see the sergeant major stripes, or the chevron pattern. Let's reverse our colors now. Keep things symmetrical. It's a good approach to use with wraps. So that means we would take the same number of brown threads and spiral them up the blank and back down the blank. Then we'd go back to the rust and spiral those up the blank, always to the right. and back down the blank. By now I'm sure you understand the sequence, and we're going to put our final edging of 2 light-colored threads in, up the blank, and once again back down the blank. And there you see the pattern is well defined, it's symmetrical, it's a very attractive pattern to wrap, and it's just wrapped always to one side. That's the chevron wrap. Now that we have an understanding of the diamond wrap and its variation, the chevron, let's take a look at the double diamond. And the double diamond is a nice pattern to learn in and of itself, but if remember we said we were going to talk about techniques specifically and about concepts. Well, the concepts here are that you could make any pattern either single or double. Single means that we have patterns on 2 axes, the top and the bottom of the rod. On the double patterns, in this case double diamond, we have our diamonds on 4 axes around the blank, on the top, the bottom, and on each side. And you can see this produces twice as many patterns as it would on the single diamond wrap. All right, let's remove that. I think you have a good idea of the comparison. And let's go back to looking at the circle template that we used when we laid out our wrap. Now, you remember there were 4 marks around the circles. And before I said it's a good habit to mark all 4, although on the single diamond wrap we were only going to use 2, the top and the bottom of the rod. Now we're going to need to mark all 4. That marks off each of the 4 axes or the 4 sides of the rod. When we do our layout, this time the space between centers is only going to be 1/2 a circumference. Why? Because we have twice as many patterns in the same space. So, if you'll recall, we had measured our circumference with a piece of masking tape that we put around and we marked. Now, in order to keep continuity and use those calipers, you can simply take and fold this in half, and you now have half the circumference. And you can set your dividers to that and use it to lay off each of these centers. So just to make sure we're clear, and on the right line we have 4 axes. We have the top of the rod, we have the bottom of the rod, these are where the diamonds are occurring, on this side of the rod and opposite it on this side of the rod. We've done this by putting 1/2 of circumference, and our layout should look like this. And here's a rod where I've done the layout on. And each place that the thread crosses is of course going to be a center for the diamonds, and they are on the 4 axes all the way around. When we make the wrap, the double diamond wrap, we're going to actually construct 2 diamonds simultaneously. They'll each be single diamonds, but everything that we do when we take a step on one, we have to take a step on the other. For example, remember in the diamond we started out by wrapping, in this case it'd be a silver, a number of bands of thread to the left of the center. Okay? We would go up here, and when we're making the double diamond, we're going to wrap so many to the left and the center on one, and then we're going to move 90 degrees around the blank and do the same thing. In other words, we've got 2 patterns to be concerned about, and the easiest way to keep track of them is to label them. For example, take little labels, masking tape with some ink on them, and we're going to take this thread here that comes in, the center thread, and put this on, and that is going to be our number 1 pattern. You take a similar one that we can make, a number 2, and label the next thread around the blank, which would be 90 degrees around the blank. Perhaps it'd help if we remove this for the moment. and just concentrate on the layout. We would start by whatever we do here, in this case a number of threads to the left, up and back, spiraled. Then we would repeat it here on the second thread, a number of threads, same color, same number to the left, up and back. We would then come back on a diamond sequence and go to the right-hand side of number 1, spiral up and back, immediately go over to number 2 and spiral up and back. I think you'll get a better idea of this if we look at it more closely. Here we have the close-up of the layout for the double diamond wrap. We can't see the little number 1 and number 2 masking tape tabs that we put on, but if you keep in mind that the thread all the way to the left is number 1 and the one in just about the middle of the screen is number 2, you'll be able to follow the sequence. Remember, we said the secret of the double diamond is to alternate. Everything we do on the number 1 thread, we do on the number 2 thread. And we'll start out by, we'll spiral up and down the blank some light colored threads, and we'll start on number 1 to the left. We'll bring that thread back down again to the left in a conventional diamond format. Now we have to repeat that exact same move, if you will, on the number 2 thread. So we'll spiral a couple of light threads up the blank around number 2 and then back down the blank. Now let's move back to number 1 thread. The diamond, we alternate from left to right, so we go to the right of number 1 thread and put 2 threads up the blank and then 2 light colored threads back down the blank. Now we're going to switch over to number 2 thread and repeat exactly the same thing. Take 2 threads up the blank to the right and 2 threads back down the blank to the right. All right, we've alternated side to side on each wrap, but most importantly, we've alternated from number 1 to number 2. Let's take another color and go through it once more, and I think you'll see the diamonds form. Take rust, and we'll start on the left, up the blank, bring it back down the blank. Now move over to center thread number 2. Take the same rust, up the blank on the left, and bring it back down the blank. Now go back to number 1, go to the right side, take the rust up the blank, and now take the rust back down the blank. Move over to thread number 2, repeat with the rust up the blank and bring it back down the blank. And now you can see that where the diamonds form. Initially, remember I said we're going to do 2 separate diamond wraps, but we're going to do them simultaneously. Number 1 was 1 diamond wrap, number 2 was the other, and we alternate back and forth. And that's all there is to doing a double diamond or a double chevron or a double anything. Just alternate back and forth. All of our patterns up to this point have been built around a cross. Now I'd like to introduce another concept, and that is that the layout need not just be a cross, but it can be a combination of crosses and boxes. For example, the pattern that you see in front of you here now is a star, and the layout is pictured right above it, and it consists of a cross in the center in beige or tan, surrounded by a blue box. Of course, you know how the cross is made. The box is made in the same way. We just spiral a thread up the blank and then back. That forms 2 sides of the cross. Take another thread, spiral it up and back, and it forms the other side of the box. So we now have a blue box around a cross. And with this layout and a given wrap sequence, we'll be able to make this star down here. The first step is to wrap about 1 thread at a time, and you must remember as you get into the more complex wraps that it's almost always necessary in the intricate part of the wrap to do it just 1 thread at a time. You cannot wrap a band of 2, 3, 4 threads, just 1 at a time. So we're going to start with the cross in the center, and we're going to wrap 1 thread on each of the 4 sides of that cross. In the jargon of the rod builder, that's called wrapping to the outside. Then we're going to take a blue thread and we're going to wrap on the outside or to the outside of the blue box that surrounds it. Now that's one pass. We've gone around the tan thread across once. We've gone around the blue box once. That's a pass, and we repeat. We'll come back to the center, wrap another tan thread around the cross, then a blue thread on all four sides of the outside of the blue box. And we're just building that center cross exactly the same as we did a diamond. In fact, if you look at the actual star pattern, you can see where the center is nothing more than a tan diamond. So what we're going to do is, as we're making that diamond, we're also going to be adding the points to it. And that's where the blue threads come in. Obviously, as we wrap out around the cross, we're eventually going to reach the point where that original blue thread was, the layout thread. And if you look down below here, you can see that point. It's the point closest to the center in blue is where that original layout thread was up here. So we keep wrapping one thread at a time until the pattern forms. Then we want to isolate the pattern. That is, we want to put blue around the outside. Now it's no longer necessary to use one thread at a time, so we can take and wrap a band. We can take 4 or 6, however many threads it's comfortable to handle, and go around the outside and form a background. And that can be as large as you deem desirable. And then in my case here, I took a couple of white threads and just went around the very outside to set it off. And that's how we make a star pattern. Briefly, I'd like to introduce you to another pattern. It happens to be called the spaced star. And I'd like to go over it with you, not just to show you another pretty face, which it is. I think it's a nice pattern. But because I want to introduce you to one more concept. We varied our layout. Now I'd like to vary the sequence. Here's our pattern, the spaced star. And you'll notice one thing. We reversed the colors that we were using before, partly just to give you the understanding of how different things can look just by switching background color and foreground color. Okay, up above it is the layout, and you'll notice while the colors are switched, it's exactly the same layout that we used for the star pattern. In other words, it has a cross in the center surrounded by a box. We just interchanged the colors. But I can't emphasize this enough. That layout is exactly the same. We have a cross in the center, this time blue, surrounded by a tan box. Okay, what we're going to do, since we have an identical layout, is merely change the sequence. And let me outline what the sequence would be. First, we would wrap a blue thread around the cross on each of the 4 sides. And remember the jargon, we're going to wrap to the outside of the cross. Then we're going to take a tan thread and we're going to go around the outside, just as we did before, of the box. We're going to make one circuit, one thread around the outside of the box. Now we're going to add a third step to our pass. We're going to wrap to the inside of the box as well as the outside. We're going to bring a thread right on the inside all the way around on all 4 sides of the box. So our pass will consist of 3 steps, which will be wrap the cross to the outside, wrap the box to the outside, wrap the box to the inside. We do that one thread at a time, and then we go back and we repeat. And we just keep going through that same sequence. Keep in mind now we've got the same layout but a different wrapping sequence, and we end up with an entirely different pattern called, in this case, a spaced star. All of these wraps are cross wraps that we've been talking about, and they're formed by spiraling threads up and down the blank, generally at about a 45-degree angle. And the basic wrapping techniques that we've discussed earlier have been used here. There are base wraps. Everything is very standard. In every case, you could define these wraps in terms of two things. One is the layout, and the other is the wrapping sequence. And the layout, you'll remember, consisted of crosses and boxes in various combinations, and the sequence is simply the manner in which the threads were repeatedly wrapped around the particular layout. Then, as in the case of the star and the space star that we looked at, some more thread is wrapped around to isolate and define the pattern, give more background. And then we come to a point where we differ as far as the way the wrap is done. In some cases it's stopped there and you can still see the bare blank, and that's called an open wrap. Other cases here, threads have been wrapped completely around the blank so that you can no longer see the blank, and that's called a closed wrap. And we need to take a closer look at one more technique and concept, and that is exactly what is a closed wrap. The best way to understand a closed wrap is perhaps to look at one just before it closes, just before it's finished. And I've got such a rod and a wrap here in front of me. It's a familiar star pattern which you've seen before, and we have a star wrapped here, and as we wrapped around the star after it was formed and building the border of the gold thread, we're going around each one of the stars, and I've stopped just short of closing. That is, there's a space here that can be filled by thread, probably one or two passes. And to give you an idea, I've got a band here of 4 or 5 threads, and that's what would be wrapped in there. Of course, there'd be an X formed, the band going the other way, and that would close that off completely. Okay, so that's what the closed wrap would look like when it's finished. This particular blank has been laid out in a special way, and I want to point out that if we look at each end, it's been set up so that the space here is the same. Down here, at the tip end of the blank, where it's smaller in diameter, we still have essentially the same width of a space to be filled by thread. If we come down here to the butt end, exactly the same thing. That space remains the same. All right, I want to show you what happens if we had instead laid this out by using the regular centers equal to the circumference, and every one was the same. Here we have a wrap made just in that fashion, the same wrap with a star pattern. And what's different is, if we start down here and you look at the tip end, you'll see that it's already closed in with thread. There's no way that any more thread could be squeezed in. Yet if we go up to the other end of the blank, up here as we come up you start to see space occurring and more, and up here at the butt end that space is quite large. So if I were wrapping on this, I'd have a very difficult time. I have space to fill up at the upper end but no way to put it in at the lower end, and I'd tear my hair out probably. Be very disconcerting. It can be corrected. It's called a taper offset layout, and let me show you that, and we'll do that on our training rod. Now we're going to make certain assumptions here on our training rod. One is that this line represents the point where we wanted our base wrap to end and the start of our wrap. And assume for a moment that this line was not there. I said I want to have a wrap in about this space, and I first found the circumference. I used a piece of tape, as we've been doing, and I found the circumference at the midpoint. And that, when I put it down, measured 37 millimeters. And I said, all right, in my space up in here on the blank, that if I wanted to have, how many 37 millimeter patterns could I have before I filled that space? Well, 4 times 37 was 148, and that would give me 4 repeats. And I said, that's fine. I took a ruler and I measured 148 millimeters, and I put this second line in up here. All right, we now have the beginning and the end, or the butt and the tip of the wrap, and we can measure the circumference in each end. I did that down here as a piece of masking tape that I had wrapped around at the butt end, and that's my circumference. I labeled it with a B. Over here is another piece of masking tape that I wrapped around at the tip end, labeled it with a T. That's my circumference at that end of the blank. Now, the next thing I need is a pad of paper, and I'm going to temporarily set aside our training rod and show what we're going to do. We're going to transfer these measurements from here onto a piece of paper. We need a special pad of lined paper, special in that there are pre-printed lines on it, and just any kind of tablet paper will do. Preferably you should have a margin line on one side. If not, you would draw one in. All right, we take and we set our dividers equal to the circumference measurement at the butt end of the blank. This is now taken and transferred onto the pad. Line up one side of the dividers with the margin and the other is where we put our mark. Now we said we were going to have 4 repeats, so while I keep that in mind as I come over here and bring the dividers down to fit the tip measurement, and when I come back to the pad, I count down 4 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the 4 repeats of the pattern. The 4 patterns are going to show up. Again, align this and put a mark for now the circumference as generated at the tip section. All I need now is a straight edge to take and connect those 2 marks that I made. Now I can start at the bottom and transfer that measurement from the butt. I need to put my rod now into the now familiar butt wrap alignment tool. Lay that in here. Line up the tool. I could, since it's a closed wrap, scribe the blank or put a line on it because it'll be covered by thread. We'll just measure here. I go to the pad, take the bottom line measurement, bring that over, and use that as the first center on the butt end of the blank. Okay, put that mark there. That's one center. Now I take my dividers back, go to the second line. I'll have to open the dividers a bit to where that line comes across. Come back here onto the blank, line it up, and mark my second center. Go back up to the third line, open the dividers a little further to line up with the line. Bring that back here on the blank and mark my third center. I think some of these are getting a little fading under the light here. Now we go to the top one, the very top line, measure the circumference there with the dividers, that line, bring it back, and if it doesn't line up with this original line we scribed, don't worry. We arrived at that as kind of an average way, just as to get an idea where we were going to go. This last point that I just made here, that's the one we'd use for the center. Don't worry about this line. It'll be covered by thread when it's wrapped over with the base wrap. Okay, now I have these centers marked off, and I'm all set to work except for one thing. On the back side, that is 180 degrees around the blank, I need to locate my first center. And I would do that by going back to the very first line where I took this measurement on the pad and taking half of that measurement. Then just moving up on the pad the same way as I did for the other marks. Now I have a layout that if I follow and put the threads on, when I bring the threads together to close, they'll be perfectly on. There'll be no problem with too tight at one end and too loose at the other. Guaranteed for you it'll work. That's the taper offset layout. Custom rod building is the fastest growing segment of the entire fishing tackle industry today. And for the right kind of person, and there are thousands and thousands of them, there are few hobbies or part-time businesses that can offer as much real creative satisfaction and enjoyment as crafting your own custom rod. We hope that we've been able to share with you some of the things that make it so exciting. If so, and you find that you like rod building, I'd suggest that you look into and find out more about Rod Crafters. This is an organization that since 1974 has been publishing a bi-monthly magazine entirely of shared ideas on methods, techniques, and ideas about custom rod building. As the editor, I'd be delighted to send you information. Just drop me a note in care of Rod Crafters, 444 Shantz Spring Road, Allentown, Pennsylvania, 18104. Custom rod building is a way not only of making a better rod, and as we've seen, a better looking rod, but it's a way of enhancing your own fishing pleasure as well as that of other people. We can build beautiful rods all the seasons of the year, as well as all the seasons of our life.
The largemouth bass. If you want to tackle the hard-hitting action of America's favorite game fish, the 3M Sportsman's Video Collection has a complete series of original programs that'll make you the best bass angler on your water. There's Big Mouth, a classic film that puts you in the bass's world. Years in the making, edited from miles of incredible underwater footage. You'll see the secrets of bass behavior and why they're so challenging and exciting to catch. Nobody understands big bass better than Doug Hannon, the bass professor. In the Hannon Big Bass videos, you'll learn the newest, most innovative ideas about finding and catching bass. Through amazing underwater photography, you'll see how bass detect and strike lures. You'll learn to recognize the locations that hold big bass. And when you're ready to tie into one of these lunkers, Doug will show you his complete system for going after really big bass. The special lures, the necessary equipment and skills. Doug prepares you to catch the bass of a lifetime. For a look at bass fishing from top to bottom, spend a day on the water with championship fisherman Ricky Clunn. Ricky will show you how to find bass fast in unfamiliar waters and catch them with all the top techniques, from worm fishing to flipping. When you understand the whys behind a sport, the how-tos make a lot more sense. That's the secret of our trail-breaking Bass Mastery series with Al Lindner. Al shows you the basic principles behind his ability to catch more and bigger bass. With Al's formula for success, you'll be able to locate the bass hotspots, know what the fish are doing, and then select the right presentation. You'll catch more bass more consistently under a wide range of conditions. In the active spring period, Al shows you how to deal with the rapidly changing conditions of spring as the bass go through pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn patterns. It's the fast and efficient way to springtime fishing excitement. You can beat the dog days of July and August and still catch bass when few other anglers know what to do. Weather changes, human pressure, the effects of light and shade. You'll be able to master them all when you learn Al's surefire strategies for summer. In the Trophy Bass of Fall, Al shows you how to find those tight groups of really big cold water bass. Discover why fall conditions offer the best opportunity to land a trophy. The Bass Mastery programs, no other videos do more to develop all your angling skills. How to interpret local conditions, how to find bass, and how to pick the right lures. 3M Bass Fishing Videos. We're the best at making you better. And if you love fishing, hunting, and other sports, think of 3M as your total video resource for outdoor adventure. the gentle beauty of a deep forest glade, the heart-pounding excitement of a trophy buck in rut, going one-on-one with North America's most popular big game animal. That's what deer hunting's all about. And nobody brings you more in-depth information and true-life action than the 3M Sportsman's Video Collection. The excitement of calling a bird into your gun. The satisfaction of making a clean shot. And the companionship of a well-trained dog. If you like the challenge of upland game bird and waterfowl hunting, 3M Sportsman's Video Collection gives you the thrill of being there and the knowledge you need to master the sport. If it's excitement you're after, come fishing with the experts from 3M Scientific Anglers and learn ways to catch more and bigger trout on the fly. You'll learn where to find trout in a stream and ways to present the right fly with the perfect cast so you can catch the most elusive trout during hatch and non-hatch situations. Plus, there's steelheading for 20-pound rainbows or going for the ultimate saltwater challenge. Let 3M Scientific Anglers bring home the excitement while you learn a lifetime of mastery techniques that will help you become the best fly fisherman you can be.